I've got a quick video I want you to see before I introduce my guest. Will you roll that beautiful bean footage, Victor?
What do you think about immigration in general in the United States?
Well, I think, first of all, there's no such thing as an immigrant in general. I mean, there are some groups of immigrants who come to this country and add tremendously. There are others who come here and go on welfare. I think one of the sad things is people tend to talk about immigrants in the abstract. And there has never been a time in the history of the country when immigrants from different places were all the same. And so I think one of the things the United States has to be able to do in the long run is control the border, first of all, because if you don't control the border, it is absolutely irrelevant what your policy is, because other people will decide who gets in.
This is a tough public policy question, maybe even a moral question. What do we do about illegal immigrants who are in this country, supposedly 10 million of them, who are already here? Can we change the law and kick them out, or do we give them a path to citizenship, or what do we do, or ignore them, which is what we're doing now?
Well, ignoring is the most politically expedient thing to do. The question is whether or not you want to enforce the law. And if you enforce the law, I think you'll solve 90% of the problem. You know, if you're here illegally and you pay a price for that, fewer people will come, and many of those who are here now may decide that it's time to leave. You don't have to, the silly notion that you have to search out every illegal immigrant. Nobody is even suggesting that.
And so I wanted you to hear that, because that's exactly what I've been saying. But I felt like sometimes you need to hear from somebody other than me. And which is the reason why I also brought this gentleman here tonight, who's been a dear friend for many, many years. We say all the time whenever we're speaking somewhere or doing something together that we are partners in crime. We get out and we do stuff and we make the devil mad. And we make the devil mad on purpose. And so I want to challenge you as you partake and receive all that my brother's going to share tonight, that you get girded with this truth and you go out into all the world and you make the devil mad on purpose. Amen? Y'all ready to make the devil mad on purpose? I mean, you're getting ready to get some wisdom and some knowledge that can just overturn all of the crazy stuff that you've been hearing time and time again. He's in the documentary Uncle Tom. I think you were in the documentary Uncle Runaway Slave too, weren't you? You weren't in that one. Okay, that's somebody else I'm thinking of. So I want you to give a warm New Beginnings online and in-house welcome to my good friend, Edgar Ralph Sr.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Edgar Ralph Sr. It's great to be with you guys tonight, and I want to thank my wife for making it out here tonight, Lily Ralph, who that's my true partner in crime. She will claim it, but she can claim it that she's in part responsible for me getting into all of the things that I've gotten into for almost the last 28 years. Just a little bit about myself. We came here in 2005 from New Orleans as a result of Hurricane Katrina. We were activists in New Orleans at that time for about 8 years. In May of 1997, the mayor of the city at the time passed an executive order giving domestic partnership benefits to homosexuals, and we just thought that was just a little too much. So within about a week, a guy who had a radio program at the time, it was a local talk show host at the time, and he was on the radio every day at 4 o'clock on a Christian station, and I just started listening to him a few months, and I just happened to be on vacation that next week. So this happened on a Saturday night that it was announced, and so the following Friday, myself, my wife, and my 4 kids at the time, who were all homeschooled, we're out there with about 30 other people, really letting the mayor hear it from us in front of City Hall without protest. So that's how I got started with with all of these different things. Tonight, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Uncle Tom video and answer questions. This is going to be a dialogue, hopefully, where you can ask questions, and just feel free to ask all the questions that I call them the why questions. The why questions I get, a lot of places I go, is why do black people do this, that, and the other, in this way and that way, and all that kind of stuff. So tonight, just feel free to ask those questions. If you're not a black person, chances are you probably have these questions. If you're a black person, you probably already know. And it's not one set of answers. So just a little bit about myself. My parents were going around a second time when I was born. So I had sisters and brothers who were 15 to 20 years older than me. And, they met when my oldest sister and my oldest brother were both 9. So I had, by the time they got married, they were, around 40-ish. And so I guess in some ways, my younger brother and I got the best of what they had to give. But at the time, it felt a bit overbearing because I think they were, our parents are going to try to correct mistakes that you think you made with the first ones. So what happened was, they poured a lot into us. And by this time, my dad had been saved. My mom was saved. I don't know if they were saved, at what point they got saved, but they were saved by the time we came along. And so they really made sure that we knew the things that they thought we needed to know. For example, I went to a parochial school because this is around the time, this is a little bit after the time when they had just made prayer in school. Well, I think prayer had become illegal in school, in public school. So they made sure we went to a parochial school so we would be taught religion. So we were taught religion in school, we were taught religion at home, and we were taught religion in church. Went to Sunday school, the whole 9. So that didn't keep me from, not getting myself into stuff I shouldn't have been into as time went by, but it gave me the foundation that I needed. And it helped me to understand a lot of things as I grew older, and things that you don't consider to be valuable when you're young, you find out how valuable they are when you get older. So that's a lot of what played into me having to try to instill in my children as they came along. So, for that benefit, So tonight I'm going to go through a little presentation. I'll move this off to the side a little bit. This little presentation I put together is rather short, but I want you to see it because this is a little bit about Black history, since we're all celebrating Black History Month. This is a little bit about Black history, and a lot of Black history that most Black people don't know, and sure enough, most white people don't know. And the interesting thing is, back in 2010, right before I was about to retire from my job, because as a result of moving here, my job insisted that I go back to New Orleans to work, and I did that for a few years and realized I couldn't keep that up. So I took an early retirement, and I got involved with a group of guys who had an idea for an organization. And so the organization was called Game Changers. And so what we did was we went out into the Black community, anybody who would listen to us talk, and explain to Black people as often as possible how we were actually conservatives and we believe in a set of values, and as a result, this should affect how we vote. Well, we had some success with that, but anyway, WTC Strategies is the company I started a few years ago to help our candidates who agree with our ideas to win. Because a lot of what I saw was candidates getting raked over the coals, charged through the nose for the services, and not really getting good service. So I figured I'd try to help out with that. And so the motto is we play to win. So behind that is, I'm not doing this because I just need something else to do. I do this because I want to see our guys win. And when I get involved in the campaign, we coach where necessary, but we also help people to come up with strategies that are successful. You can move on to the next slide. So tonight we're talking about factual Black American history. You can move on. And so this is a little bit about some of the people that you may have heard of and you may not. For example, Benjamin Banneker. This is in the 1700s when slavery was still very prominent here in the United States. He was an astronomer, a clockmaker, and a publisher. He lived from 1731 to 1806. He was able to make the calculations to predict solar and lunar eclipses and to compile an ephemeris for the Benjamin Banneker's Almanac. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of him, but when I was when I told you I attended parochial school from 1 to 8th grade, we had a Black history book, Black history textbook. This was a predominantly Black Catholic school that was run, by the Catholic Church, and it was mostly nuns. And when I was about 3rd grade, a nun came in who was younger than the previous principal, and she was determined, y'all gonna be some educated Black kids. And she was like a sergeant. It's like when she walked in the cafeteria and she rang that bell, she better not hear a sound. She'd ring that bell and stand up there like that and just look around. And everybody was totally silent, because she was rough. But she made sure that we learned the things we knew. So I think 4th and 5th and 6th grade, I had a textbook, was a Black history textbook. We had to learn things like the I Have a Dream speech. We had to learn it and be able to recite it verbatim. We had to stand up in front of the class and do it one at a time, those type of things. So these kind of things kind of stuck with me over the years. Phyllis Wheatley, who was a poet, lived from 1753 to 1784, one of the first Black poets in America whose work was published. You see, even though slavery was in play, these things were happening during that time. So let me move on to the next slide. The Reverend Richard Allen, religious leader from 1760 to 1831. In 1816, he founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. Now, that's real close to me because I was a member of the AME Church up until I was about 32 years old. I was, my mom was a member of the church, and as a result, I was a member of the church. So I knew the history of the AME Church as a result of attending that church. It's a rich history. And so unfortunately, they've gone off the rails as far as the liberalism that they bought into. But back then, it was still pretty liberal in some ways. But I would say more doctrinally, they were moving in that direction, but they were nothing like what they are now. Today, it's almost heretical. Sojourner Truth, who was an abolitionist from 1797 to 1883, also known as Isabella Baumfree. She's a noted speaker for both the abolitionist movement and the women's rights movement. With a show of hands, anybody in here ever heard of any of these people we talked about so far? Okay, all right, good. All right, move on to the next slide. Nat Turner, he's kind of famous because he was a rebellion leader. In 1831, he led a failed slave rebellion in Southampton County, Virginia, the most remarkable instance of Black resistance to enslavement. So he made a name for himself. Unfortunately, he didn't live very long. Norbert, I think the name is pronounced Relo, Norbert Relo. My dad's name was Norbert, so once again, I thought I'd throw that one in there. Inventor and engineer in 1806. He lived from 1806 to 1894, so he lived a pretty long time. So he obviously, lived through and as a result saw slavery come to an end. Most noted for inventing the multiple effect evaporator, which is an energy efficient means of evaporating water. So I think there's probably one more slide with the, Frederick Douglass. Most people know about him. An abolitionist, an editor, orator, author, statesman, reformer. He was referred to as a sage of Anacostia, among the most prominent and influential Black American lecturers and authors in the United States history. Now, when we started Game Changers, we had to be creative to get people to cause them to create some curiosity sometimes to make them want to hear what we had to say. So we had T-shirts we used to sell back then, and this was, 10, 12 years ago when we started doing this. And we had on the front of it says, Party of Frederick Douglass. And then on the back of it, we said Party of MLK. And then it had our website at the bottom. Now, of course, some people knew that Frederick Douglass was instrumental in starting the Republican Party. A lot of people didn't. But for the ones who knew that, it was really curious when they saw the back of the shirt said Party of MLK. Because like me, they were shocked to realize that Martin Luther King, for a long time was a Republican. The reality is most blacks were Republicans, I would say probably until about the 1960s. When you look at the stats, you'll see that prior to John Kennedy getting elected, the majority of black people voted Republican in America. And they had some pretty strong words for those who didn't. For any black person that voted Democrat, the Republicans had some pretty strong words. As a matter of fact, the words that were used by Frederick Douglass they were just nice ways of actually cursing somebody out. Really, I'm saying, it's pretty rough, you know. Harriet Tubman was a writer and abolitionist from 1820. She lived from 1820 to 1913, almost 100 years. As an abolitionist, she acted as an intelligence gatherer, a refugee organizer, a raid leader, a nurse, a revival speaker, and a fundraiser. Now, I didn't know about the fundraising part until I saw this, but I found that was very interesting. But these are people who were very instrumental in helping to move black people forward, with just being a person who happened to be black in America, taking advantage of the opportunities that they had. Next slide, please. And of course, we know about Booker T. Washington, political leader, educator, and author. Lived from the mid-1800s to the early 1900s. Is one of the dominant figures in black history from 1890 to 1915, much to improve the friendship and working relationship between the races. And, you know, it was actually Martin Luther King, and listening to the things that I heard him say, as well as learning about him when I was growing up, that in a way, I guess it sort of inspired me to want to be a part of that bridge, to help bridge those gaps. Because in our society today, and it's been this way for a long time, that we have a unnecessary divide. We see here in America that we don't see in other places when we go around the world between the races. When you think about black people who served in the military, going back, say, in the 40s, the 50s, even the 60s, and the 70s, and then sometimes they would say they might have been stationed somewhere around the world, and they didn't feel good when they came back home. They didn't feel like they were being treated right. Obviously, they weren't. But they felt like I was treated better by people who were foreigners, and they didn't really look at me as just being a black man or, you know, a black person. They looked at me just for being an individual. And so I thought that if I'm going to contribute to what I'm doing, I want to help everybody come together. I don't just want to come help black people or white people or people in between. I want to help everybody understand how we're to live together, and especially if we're Christians, because the bottom line is the Bible tells us that those of us who are Christians, we are in Christ. And if we're in Christ, all of these other things that we have that divide us must fall away. Now, we're going to have some differences. That's just reality. But they shouldn't cause the kind of division that we see happening. And Satan plays on the hearts of man and constantly drives those wedges. And we have to be constantly aware of what's taking place to not allow that to happen. Mamie Smith was a vaudeville singer, dancer, pianist, actress, and a blues singer. Lived from 1883 to 1946, one of the first black Americans to make vocal blues recordings in 1920. Move on, please. Next slide. Okay. Mamie C.J. Walker, first woman millionaire. Not first black woman millionaire, first woman millionaire. Okay? In America, lived from 1867 to 1919, also known as Sarah Breedlove, founded Madam C.J. Walker, I'm sorry, I said Mamie, it's supposed to be Madam. Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company to sell hair care products and cosmetics. So she was the precursor to Mary Kay. Think about it, you know. I mean, Jack Johnson, pugilist. I wanted to make sure I included his name in here. lived from 1878 to 1946, first black heavyweight boxing champion of the world. Now, my wife and I have talked about this quite often. Most people don't know why we have marriage licenses, and I'm not sure this is the entire reason, but there was a law way back when, probably 100 years ago, called the Mann Act. Anybody ever heard of that? Okay. And the Mann Act was, I think, had to do with if a man took a woman who was not of the same race, particularly a black man and a white woman, going across state lines to get married, that was against the law. Okay? So they started having marriage licenses. They passed a law to have marriage licenses to cut down on that. Okay? So now we just adopted it. It's just part of what we do. But, so just so you know, you don't really have to have a license to be married, but, you know, most states do it. Duke Ellington, many people know about him, jazz composer, musician, band leader, from 1899 to 1974, awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1969 and the Legion of Honor by France in 1973. So we listen to, you know, if you're a jazz enthusiast, you've listened to his music, you probably like it. You know, if you're a jazz enthusiast. Move on. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to talk about tonight, a little bit, is how to become highly effective in getting your message across to people who don't necessarily agree with you politically. Okay? What happens is this is the norm. We learn things. We get excited. We want to share it with people we know. I first got saved around the same time my politics started changing. It's interesting how that happens. You know, I think the politics were already kind of working when I got saved, and then I started realizing how much this stuff coincides. I really got excited. So, you know, I started running around to my friends trying to help them to see what I just learned. And I was amazed at how they weren't getting it. And these were people who I went to church with. So I was a little bit upset, so I had to be creative in how I got my point across, hoping it would make a difference. So if you remember, in the 90s, there was this organization called the Christian Coalition. And so I was on their mailing list, so they would send me these scorecards every so often and would score the voting patterns of the people in elected office. So I had all the voting patterns of, in one case, I think it was 2 or 3 cases, 19 different items. Okay? And it had the voting record of everybody who was in the Senate, and everybody who was in the House. So what I did was I'd take it with me, and I'd show the score of the voting pattern to the people I was talking to. And they would be upset. They were like, I voted for that guy. I said, I know, that's why I'm showing you that. And but you know, what happened was we had an election come up, and they didn't change their votes. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, you know, you're supposed to change what you're doing here. So I figured, okay, maybe we'll try something different. So Lily and I, we did this. We started out with their family members at a Thanksgiving one time. Bunch of people. We were crazy like that. So we take a sheet of paper, okay, and a pen, and we just ask the questions, okay? And we say, if you would have voted yes on this, put a Y. And we have it numbered, 1 to 19. If you would have voted no, put it in, and have them put it in. So when they checked how they would have voted against the person who represented them, most of the time it was either 1 or 2 times that they voted the same way. So now we had an opportunity to explain to them, if we live in what we call a representative government, you're not being represented by the person that you vote for, okay? This is how you put it in front of their face, how you help them to see that this is really pretty stupid if you're going to consistently vote against yourself. You know, consider what you're doing here. This is not a popularity contest. This is not about, I identify with them because we're the same color. These people don't identify with you no more than the man on the moon. They don't care. Look, you're talking about having to be prayed up. Just before we came out here, Troy was telling me about Tony Rose, who's a state representative here in Texas, who's putting up a bill trying to get it passed in this in what is that, in the committee, that would give children under 18 the right to not have their parents govern how they get medical care, or what else is it? In education. But you got to pay for everything else. Now, let me tell you something. I'm gonna find out. I'm gonna use that, and I'm gonna do everything I can to get this woman kicked out of that seat. Okay? She needs to go. This is absurd. I will make sure. I will do everything I can to make sure everybody who's in her district knows about this. And there's a lot of blacks and a lot of Hispanics in her district, and they don't agree with any of that foolishness. I can tell you that right now. Okay, so becoming highly effective, enhance your communication skills, know your audience, listen to the arguments of the other side, and develop a greater understanding of minority culture. These are 4 key elements of being successful. If you notice, I said becoming highly effective, okay? I don't just want to be effective in getting my message across. I want to be highly effective. Why? Because if I'm highly effective, I'm going to get more result. If I get a result, and I'm likely going to get a better result from whoever is listening, because I want to know something about them. So be able to communicate what you want to say. How many times have you listened to someone when they're talking and they have something on their minds? If you listen to talk radio, you hear this a lot. And they get, Charles, you're up. And Charles is stammering. And let me tell you something. If you ever call into a talk radio show, don't thank the host for taking their call. Don't do that. That's just a waste of time. They're going to be polite, but they really don't want to hear that. They want to hear what you have to say. And you got about 30 seconds, maybe 60 if you're lucky. Okay? So make your point. Make it good. Make it clear. Okay? But when you're talking to people one-on-one, one-on-5, one-on-10, consider who you're talking to. Okay? Who's who? If you don't know who you're talking to, ask some questions. Okay? Take a statement, phrase it in the form of a question, get them to tell you what they think. Now you have an idea of who you're talking to. Now you have an idea how to transmit what's up here to the heart. You want to reach the heart, okay? Listen to the arguments. I know it's tough, especially when the arguments are foolish. And there's a lot of foolish ones out there. But keep in mind that many of the people you're talking to, they don't listen to the information that you listen to. They have not read what you read. They have not been exposed to what you know. So there's going to be a certain ignorance level there that you're just going to have to deal with, because we want to be successful, we want to be effective. So I'm not going to let them ramble on forever, but I'm going to listen to what they're saying. And chances are there's going to be some validity to what they're telling me that I can actually use to help them make a point. Here's the reality. Most of the time, we're going to identify with some of the same issues. We're going to have some of the same problems with some of the same issues. The difference we're going to have is that we're not going to agree on the solution. But if I know I'm right, then my job is to help them to see why my idea is better, right? But I've already gotten past halfway. We agree on what the problem is. We share a common reality as how we see it and how we don't like it, or we like it. So now it's just a matter of getting them to agree with me that this is the solution. And why else am I listening? Because chances are they may say something at some point that I've never thought of, and I find it to be valuable. Or I've heard it a bunch of times, and I never heard it that way before. And now I consider it to be valuable. So now I'll say, okay, I see your point. Let's try to incorporate that into what I'm trying to advance. Keep this in mind, and this is how you keep your sanity. Also, a broken clock is right twice a day, okay? So I mean, it's the reality. So every now and then, somebody who has a bunch of bad ideas come up with some good ones, okay? So don't automatically write them off, all right? So listen to the arguments of the other side and develop a greater understanding of minority culture. Now, if you're not a minority or you're not black, okay, because you could be Hispanic or something else, but you want to understand as many cultures as you can, okay, other than the one that you are part of. And that's helpful to you because it's going to help you understand the thinking. It's also going to help you to understand how to communicate your message, right? Now, I've always said, a smart person who's a minority, if you have any sense, is going to learn how to understand white people, okay? Because that's the majority. And because things run the way white people have set it up. This is not a slam, this is not a criticism, it's just the way it is. And if you're smart, you're going to figure out how do I navigate this, right? Within black culture, we have certain ways we do things, certain ways we talk to each other, right? There's certain ways we talk as black people to black people, and certain ways we talk as black people to white people. And I'm sure that's vice versa, okay? That's not an odd thing. That's just the way it is. But the thing is, if you're not black, and the reason why I use black is because that's the culture, first of all, it's Black History Month, but that's also the culture that everybody seems to struggle with, right? Because most of the time, people can't figure us out. They're like, we're not really sure what it is you really want. Well, you know, the reality is most black people don't know what they want, okay? That's just a sad fact, because here's the deal. Look, okay. Go back into the 1960s, we were Negroes. We didn't give ourselves that name. That just means that you're a dark color, okay? Then we were, in the 70s, we became Afro-Americans, okay? Then in the late 80s, toward the 90s, we became African-Americans. We not kind of stopped at black, you know? No, I forgot that we were black. We went from being Negroes to being black. Then we were Afro-Americans. Then now we're African-Americans. And now some people just want to say we're Africans. I say I'm an American who just happens to be black, okay? So, you know, sometimes when I really get ticked off and I'm filling out some kind of a form, I'll put other, okay? Because now I can be whatever I want, right? Yeah? It's like, you know, I can be a 6'5" Chinese guy if I want. You know, it's like, you know, so I just put other. You know, so you know, it's real funny. You know, there was when we lived in New Orleans, there was this college. It was predominantly black college, and someone who was white applied to go there, and they applied for financial assistance, and he put down African American because the man was from Africa, and they got upset with him. Okay. But he was from Africa. You said you got African American as one of the choices. He's an African, okay? It's crazy. I'm telling you, it's crazy stuff. It's crazy stuff, man. So, you know, the thing is, when you think about these things that we deal with, you have to get to a point where you just, you know, have fun with it, you know? This lady, she wrote a book, several books, actually. Her name is Karen Watson. She's the first black woman to live in Highland Park, okay? And I was told, I didn't live here at the time, when she moved in Highland Park, Dallas Morning News did a full-page spread. Guess who moved into the neighborhood? Like, wow. You know, it's like, you know. When she wrote this book, and I think it was called Being a Black Republican in the Age of Obama. I think it was the first one she wrote. And she went to speak to some people in Shreveport. And she had been talking to this lady over the phone for for a while. And I guess she had written another book, maybe like the third book, which I don't know what the title was, but she had gotten past the first one. So obviously the woman didn't know she was black. So she get there, and she's waiting for the lady to come and, you know, and walk her in. And so she said this woman came out several times out of a room, and she's sitting like in the foyer or whatever, and looked around and went back in. And finally, she asked the woman, she said, "Are you," whatever her name was? And she said, "Yes." She said, "Well, I'm Karen Watson." And she said, "You're black." And Karen said, "And you're white." So, you know, I got to have fun with it, you know. Yeah, so the reality is this, folks. Today we live in a time where we're fortunate that we've gotten past a lot of that stuff. A lot of the people who had that stinking thing, and most of them have died out, aged out, so they're not even significant anymore. So we can actually keep the temperature where it needs to be, which is low, get past a lot of this foolishness about the racism. Racism exists, okay? But racism has existed throughout the time of mankind. It's not going anywhere because mankind in its heart is wicked. That's why man needs salvation, right? And even saved people do stupid stuff. So keep going. I'm serious. Go to the next slide, please. All right. Key elements of effective communication. Understand the priorities of the people that you talk to. Probe, ask questions, get information. My priorities, I already know what they are. I already have a whole list of things in my head when I'm going to talk to people that I want to talk to them about. I have to first figure out where do I start. So I have to first figure out who am I talking to. There's different categories. Age, okay? Demographic, meaning what racial demographic they fall in. Education level. And then ultimately, that's the basic ones. Once you figure that out, then you can kind of figure out how far or how direct you should proceed. Most of the time, you're going to start out easy, right? So there's basic, simple things. Everybody relates to what I call back pocket issues, right? So nobody who's sane that I've ever met agrees that they want to pay more taxes. So that's an easy one to start. But most people say, yeah, but the rich people ought to pay more. Well, pull it back. We're not talking about the rich people, we're talking about you, okay? Because I'm going to have time eventually to explain to them that those rich people that they're talking about never pay more taxes. You know why? Because they can afford to hire the CPAs and the lawyers and whomever to avoid the taxes, not evade, legally avoid. See, all of those left-wingers, and I don't even call them Democrats because some of them are, some of them are not, those left-wingers that constantly talk all this stuff about soaking the rich, half of them are rich, okay? And they're not going to soak themselves. And the ones who are not, their friends are rich. And their friends are paying for them, give them all that money they give them, to run for re-election, right? And that they don't always use for election purposes, but they get them to fly private jets and eat fancy meals and all that stuff. So they're not really going to soak their friends, my friend. There's only one guy that I know of recently who left the House of Representatives in D.C., he ran for president a few years back. That's when he left. But he's the only one I know that actually left the House of Representatives and he wasn't rich. Okay? All the rest of them, trust me. And the ones in Austin, trust me, that whatever, what they get, $600 a month? $600 a month? Okay? You know there's something to that, right? Look, they're not being straight with you, my friends, okay? All right? So, understand the priorities of people you're talking to. Probe. What do I mean by that? When I'm talking to somebody and they tell me certain things, typically if it sounds like something I need more information about, I just say, wow, man, that's interesting. Now I have some more questions. Pause. That's interesting. Why? Because chances are it is. Pause. I want to pause that conversation. I want to freeze that thought. That's interesting to get them to stop mentally. Now tell me more, okay? Most of the time I'm interested. Sometimes I'm not. Most of the time I'm interested for at least one reason. I need more information before I can decide how I'm going to proceed, okay? So, because I'm trying to make a connection here. In order to do that, I need information about what's making them tick. Next one is ask questions, probe. When I say probe, you think about, I'm digging in. I'm not just asking the surface questions. I'm digging in. One question leads to 5, right? We're still on the same subject. Now we move on to the next subject. I have all this information. I'm carrying it forward as the conversation goes forward. So if you get good at this, you can typically do this and be successful in 5 minutes. I call it the 5-minute qualifier, okay? When you meet someone, and chances are you only got 5 or 10 minutes maybe, you got 5 minutes and you got 10 if they like you, they'll talk to you a little longer. Unless you're stuck in a grocery line, you can't move. I'm serious. If you're stuck in a line, you can't move, then you got a little more time, right? Look, So people say, well, how do I do it? How do I do it? And I just do it, and don't worry about being perfect. Trust me, they don't know what you're doing. It's just like when you witness, right? Most people tell me throughout the year, say, well, I'm worried about if they ask me something I don't know. Okay, well, if you're witnessing to someone and they ask you something you don't know, what should your answer be? Let me get back to you on that. Exactly. Now, you would never not know that answer again, right? Next time anybody else would bring that up to you, you know it because you had to go research it. Now, so you're learning more, but if a person asks you something you don't know, say, let me get back to you on that. Now, what have you just done? You've given them a reason to give you their contact information, okay? I add them into my phone. Next to their name, I put a note where I met them, and I always get the email address, okay? Because I know texting is a big thing, but I'm an email guy, right? I like to send some of the emails you send out, some of the information you send out is going to be better in email than it's going to be in text. So I want an email address, right? And so that's all I need, just name, phone number, and email address. And now I'm going to reach out to them. I'm going to put them on a special list until they graduate from that list, and I'll move on to my regular list. And what I mean by that is I need to be able to, who was that person I met? I don't know, but they're on the special list. I look through the names, oh, that's it. And sometimes what I do is right away or within a day, I will send them a text with my information. Why? Now it's easy for me to remember who they were because I just look at my text log. So this is what you call being an effective activist, okay? An effective evangelist, whatever you want to call it. Whatever it is, you got a message, you got something that's in here that you're trying to share, that you're trying to advance, because we need help. We need serious help, okay? In every level, state, city, federal, we need help. The reason why Troy is running around here like a madman, look, honestly, I gave up. I was like, dude, you move too fast, And I got a wife and kids. It's like I can't move that fast. So just let me know where you need some help, and I'll come help you out. But I can't keep up. So but my hat's off to that brother, man. Look, Troy amazes everybody. I'm not the only one. Okay, move on to the next slide, please. Understand the mindset. This is a big one. So when you're talking to black people, all the things I talked about has to do with the mindset, right? Why is it that black people think a certain way? Why do they do what they do the way they do it? A little history here. And this disturbs me. I'm sharing my heart with you here. In the 80s, I started noticing some changes. Now, some people will say this was happening before then. This is when I noticed it, okay? I noticed some changes. I call this guardrails. As a young man in the 80s, I could look to the older people, and in spite of the fact that I didn't like a lot of what they were telling me, because I knew they were telling me things I should be doing or that I wasn't doing, or things I shouldn't be doing that I was doing, I understood there was a certain protection there, okay? These are guardrails, okay? When you're raising your children, if you give them boundaries to operate within, they have a safety feeling about that. When you take it off, they think they want you to take it off, but then they find out later they really wish you would have kept it, right? The guardrails we've lost over time. Now, it started I saw it in the black community, but now I see it in everywhere, right? We see it across our society. The guardrails are no longer really there. They're sort of, but they're weak. So we have a few people like us that's trying to help keep the guardrails up, but for the most part, they don't exist. And when the guardrails were taken away, and where they initially were just kind of lowered and then eventually taken away, now in the black community, the mindset, unfortunately, has been dominated by what is referred to as hip-hop culture, okay? Now, I'm 63, so if you've been around a little while and you understand black culture, you know that hip-hop, when it started, was not this garbage that we hear today, okay? Hip-hop, go back 30 years, was something entirely different. It was back then what is referred to hip hop today was called gangster rap, okay? Gangster rap got a bad rap because they were putting out all this bad stuff, and you had blacks and whites fighting to keep this stuff, keep it down. But over time, they lost because Bill Clinton was in office. He had a straight-up reprobate in the White House. So, it got promoted. Believe it or not, Al Gore's wife was fighting against it, okay? But Bill Clinton, he didn't openly support it, but he supported it. So the reality is that because the guardrails are not really there, you got a twisted mindset. You take that and add it to the fact that many people today don't go to church, or they've never gone to church, and then the majority of them that go to church are not serious about their faith that they claim. They don't study their Bibles. They don't know what the Word of God says, what it really says, and how do we live, right? Do your own survey. This week, I'm going to challenge you. Do your own survey and talk to the people you know and ask them, each one of them, just in a conversation, have you ever read the book of Genesis? And find out how many of them tell you yes. If you talk to 50 people and 2 of them tell you yes, I'll be shocked. How do you know the Word of God when you've never read the first book? I say, I challenge people all the time. I say, look, you need to understand how things got started. If you understood how things got started, climate change, this conversation would never be an issue because this is nothing but a bunch of foolishness, right? Climate change, global warming. The globe's got warm ever since the flood. The climate has changed, okay? Just read the book. It's not hard. So I tell people, look, read the book. And I say, you know why you should? They say, well, I don't know how to read the Bible. So when you read a book, don't you normally start at the beginning? They say, yeah. I say, why don't you just start at the beginning? It's like, I say, you'd be amazed how much sense the rest of it will make to you. So it's like, but I say, if you start at the beginning, guess what the first 3 words in the first chapter is? They say, what? I say, in the beginning? It's not rocket science, man. Next slide, please. So, mindset, a mental attitude or inclination, a belief that orients the way we handle situations. It's the way we sort out what is going on and what we should do. That's a very simple explanation. If you think about it, a mental attitude or inclination. So when you have a conversation with people on your job or wherever you associate with them, outside of church, and you talk to them and they say certain things, you just have to ask, why is that? Okay? Many times there's some valid reasons. I don't discount the reasons, okay? The reasons may be valid. They may not be correct, but they're valid, okay? So we have to figure that out. And then if they are correct, let's deal with that. Let's move on. Next slide, please. So, the effect of your conscious mind working together with your subconscious mind and all other internal and external influences. My subconscious mind is fully at work at night when I'm asleep. My conscious mind is what's going on when I'm awake. But my subconscious mind is also working at the same time. And so it's so important that we are careful of what we allow into our subconscious. There's a reason why we should not go to sleep with the TV on, if you can hear it, okay? If you go to sleep with the TV on, if you happen to go to sleep with the TV on, make sure the volume is low enough that you can't hear it, unless you make sure it's on a really silly channel that won't have a negative effect on your subconscious. You will have all kinds of crazy dreams. You ever had that happen to you? And they got these new things. These new things are supposed to help you sleep calm and all this stuff, and they play some kind of music or waves or whatever while you sleep. I would listen to that while I'm awake first, okay? Because I want to know what's on that thing. I don't want some crazy stuff going in my subconscious when I'm asleep, okay? Because it will affect how you think, okay? And it is the coordination of our beliefs, our habits, our behaviors. It works together in a synchronized manner. So when you wonder why some people, we're talking about black people specifically here, will get easily emotionally disturbed about Donald Trump, you know they've been fed a whole bunch of junk, right? Look, I have a friend of mine. We've been knowing each other since we were teenagers. She's about 3 years older than me. And I was at her house. We visited New Orleans on Thanksgiving, and I went to visit with her just to see how she was doing. We sat down talking, and she has some grown children, and she was telling me two of her two sons are both conservatives, and it drives her nuts. The whole time we're talking, her oldest son's name, Ebby. You sound just like Ebby. I said, no, Ebby sounds like me. I came here first. But, it's so funny. So I watched, for the first time ever, about 4 years ago, I watched somebody have a total meltdown about Donald Trump. I couldn't believe it. She was a school teacher. She's a retired school teacher, educated, and had a meltdown. Talk about Trump derangement syndrome. Man, I was like, wow, okay. But actually, since then, I did watch it happen one more time with someone else. It's actually kind of funny. When if you realize what's happening, you can enjoy it, okay? No, really. Most of the time, you're caught up, you're like trying to help them make sense, but if you realize what's happening, you can enjoy it. You're like, and see, Rush Limbaugh used to say, I illustrate absurdity by being absurd. So I learned that real good because I figure like this. Of all the people I talk to, many of who are black, and they don't agree with me, I have to figure out a way to make them remember my conversation. So I figure out a way to get up under their skin, with the things we're talking about. If I see that emotion level is here, my goal by the time I leave is to leave it about right there, walk away. Okay? Guess what? Every time that subject comes up from here on out, they're going to remember our conversation. All right? Right? I'm going to drive that emotion level, man. I'm going to drive it up here and shut down. I got to go. See you later. Got to have fun with it, okay? Look, you got to maintain your sanity while you're doing this, driving them insane. Because here's the deal. This is some serious stuff we're dealing with here, folks, okay? And if you don't be careful, you'll have blood pressure issues and, who knows whatever else, And I can't allow these people to be raising my blood pressure, man. I'm trying to live, I figured if I can live to be 100, 120, I got some more years to go. I can influence. How many more people can I influence? I told somebody that one time, they said, Eugene, you're the only person I know ever think like that. I said, well, I got to convince more people to think like that. Okay, so I'm serious. Okay, the coordination of your beliefs, habits, and behaviors, all synchronized, influencing your actions and your decisions. Look, why are people doing stupid things? They've been influenced. We can change that, but we have to work at it. And when you're by yourself, whether you be driving or whatever, and you're by yourself, this is the time to think about it, right? So when the opportunity comes, you can be prepared for it and try it on somebody. So what I suggest always is try it on your family members first, because you see them probably more often. And then you get more chances. If you mess up, you can come back and try it again. Now they get mad with you. It don't matter. Don't stay mad. Yeah. So basically, I have some family members that most of them are white side. And they would always want to talk to me about politics because they knew I was a Republican, They come ask me these really stupid questions. I'm thinking, now you know what the answer is. Why are you asking me that? But I would engage them for a while. But I thought if I give them information, eventually they're going to stop asking me this because they're going to understand. But no, what they do is they just keep on coming back. They don't look up the information I give them. So I say, look, I no longer have conversations. I no longer engage in political conversations with people like you. I did. I'm not going to frustrate myself. So what I do is, they'll talk and I can see they want to have a political conversation, but I'm just not going to do it because it's not worth it. If they want to talk to me, let's do this right, okay? It's serious right now, folks. We don't have time to waste. Move on. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. White Americans relating issues and ideas to black Americans. These are the issues that impede the efforts. General feeling of oppression and institutional racism. Many, not all, many black people, especially above a certain age bracket, have these feelings, a general feeling of oppression. Okay? It has to do with how you were raised, what your environment was like, the things that you took in, okay? How you were taught. You ever heard of people being taught in public schools to have a victim mentality? It's very prevalent, okay? And so we see that. Institutional racism. Institutional racism is not as big a deal right now, but it was at one time. And for older people who remember what that was, you cannot tell those people that, some of them, the bitterness that they have in their hearts will not allow them to accept the fact that we've moved past a lot of that, okay? So some of them you're going to be able to reach, some of them you won't. Some of them you're going to be able to reach a little bit, okay? So we take what we can get. Move on to the next slide, please. These are a few other ones. The history of blacks and police. This is real, okay? Now I know this is a heavy subject and we're not going to get too deep into it, but the reality is the average black person, male or female, have had some negative influence, have experiences with the police at one time or another. When I was young, when I was a teenager, let's just go back a little further. When I was in elementary school, we had Officer Friendly come around to the school, and I'm aging myself, right? Officer Friendly, and then we had, when I was a teenager, hangouts, high school. Man, we got rousted so much. We would just be walking down the street, cops just roll up on us. Now, most of the time, it were vice cops, because we saw the real police cars, we just, get over somewhere, hide where they can't see us until they pass. But if it was vice cops, look, vice cops rolling up, they playing car, they just dressed in street clothes, and they roll up, throw us against the car, search us down, don't find anything, then we just go on. But, we kind of got used to it, but it does frustrate you, right? As a matter of fact, when I was about 17, I was walking to work one night, got called in my job. I lived about 8-9 blocks away. Decided to walk to work instead of ride my bike. So I'm walking to work. It's a real cold night, so I got this big parka on. This is an avenue. This is a big street. Walking down the street, cops roll up, get up against the car, search me down, ask me a bunch of questions. They say they're looking for somebody. One cop asked me, do I have a tattoo? I said, no, I don't have any tattoos. The other cop says, man, that guy, he's not going to be a problem. He don't even have a tattoo. Like, whoa, okay. Guess what? To this day, I don't have any tattoos. Yeah. Like, I didn't know that was a thing, right? Racial prejudice. Racial prejudice is not what it was years ago. It's getting better. It still exists, but it's not what it was. But there are some people that won't let go, okay? They're going to say everything is about racism. now we got reverse racism, So basically, but racial prejudice exists. Look, America is not the only place. To this day, racial prejudice exists in Africa, okay, and other countries around the world. So if we want to get the subject down, first we have to recognize some people, this is an issue for them, right? We have to help them try to get past it, especially if they're Christians, okay? Blacks in the justice system, okay? I have a phrase I use. You can pretty much, in America, have about as much justice as you can afford to pay for. O.J. Simpson proved that, okay? So that's the reality. Now, I don't know if things are still the same after seeing what happened to Donald Trump over the last several years, so, but for the most part, you can get about as much justice as you can pay for. A few years ago, you heard about the kid that got drunk, underage, driving, ran into a bunch of people who were broke down on the side of the road, killed several people, and he got out of jail. What they called him? The affluenza, all right? The affluenza kid. He probably is about 25 now. Still never served time, as far as I know. So money talks. Whites more likely to believe in blind justice. This is a fact, okay? Because I talk to a lot of people of different races, and I get this. White people typically believe in blind justice. Black folks know better, okay? Black folks know justice is not blind. We want it to be blind, but it's not, often. Sometimes it is. So basically, you get into the justice system, I'll be honest with you, in my opinion, this is my opinion, it's the luck of the draw, You pray and ask God for favor, okay? And most of the time, you'll get through it. And there is a reality. As I became an adult, and I've had many traffic stops, more when I was younger. Most of the time I was speeding. Okay? I've not had any bad experiences with cops, right? I mean, if you treat, look, here's the reality. Cops are people too, right? So if you understand that I don't know what's going on with this guy. I don't know him. I don't know if he's a good guy or a jerk, okay? But I'm going to try to minimize my contact here. So when he comes up to my window, my license is in my hand, and hopefully maybe my registration, all that junk is in my hand. I just hand it to him. He decides to run it if he wants to run it. He comes back and he gives me a ticket or not. And then that's the end of it, okay? If I want to fight this guy, I'm going to fight him in court. And I will beat the crap out of him in court, okay? I can make my own argument, okay? I've beat traffic cops in court before by myself without a lawyer because I remember things they don't, okay? My whole point is that it's no sense in getting into an argument with a guy that's standing up next to you with a gun and a badge, okay? And so, but the thing is, you do have some fools out there. And I like to say this, you hear the arguments, people say, oh, well, 99% of the cops are good. I don't think the number's quite that high. I'll bring it down a little bit. But think about it. Let's say 10% are bad, okay? In the world, we say there are, whatever the number of Muslims, 1 billion Muslims in the world, and we say 10% are bad, right? That's a big number for people who want to be jihadists, okay? That's enough to upset a lot of apple carts, okay? So what I say to those who work in law enforcement, clean up your own act. It starts at the top, of course. You got a superintendent that's crooked, it's going to filter down to the bottom. And he's going to tolerate the foolishness. He's going to have it ongoing. Citizens have to take the position that we're not going to tolerate this. We want this to be even-handed. We don't want to be one side or the other. And this is a very sticky situation because this has to do with the law. This has to do with whether or not someone has the ability to take away your health or your freedom or your life, okay? So this is one we got to get it right as often as possible. So it's not something you can play with. Move on to the next slide, please. And these come down to what I call the heart conditions, okay? These are all matters of the heart. As Christians, we should always be aspiring to have our hearts moving in the right direction. Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Understand, God said is desperately wicked. That's the heart of man, okay? That's the heart of the unsaved man. Now, as someone who's saved, what's the potential for the heart being desperately wicked? It's still there, all right? Paul talked about in Romans 7. We struggle with this struggle to do the right thing or do the wrong thing. The potential is there, but he can overcome it. That's the difference. In those who are not saved, that's it. So you dealing with someone in any situation who's not saved, that's what you're dealing with. And we have to recognize that when we're talking about promoting a message, and the heart signifies the total inner being and includes reason, how I come to my conclusions, okay? My conclusions, I'm going to come to, some things I'm going to come to, if my heart, if I've been saved, I'm going to come to some conclusions. I'm going to say, I can't do that, or I have to do that. But when the heart's not saved, all bets are off, okay? And from the heart comes action and will. Move on to the next slide, please. And we see the fruits of our labor when we remain consistent. May of this year, I will have been an activist for the past 28 years. It's been an off and on thing. Sometimes I'm not more of an activist than others. But the reality is this. Joy's laughing. Look, there's so many times I've tried to quit. And I get people counting, hey, man, come do this. And I can't tell them no. Because it's just too good. It's like sometimes I want to tell them no, but it's like, I'm going to have too much fun. So I do it anyway. So I get dragged back into it. So what I'm saying is that when I talk about being consistent, I'm not talking about doing what we do. I'm talking about consistently being a voice, okay? You want to consistently be whomever you're talking to. One of my prayers on a daily basis is, Lord, prepare me for the day I'm about to have. Help me to have my mind right. Look, I did on my job. I deal with substance abusers all day. Praise God, it's just 3 days a week because I'd go crazy. But I'm serious though. You have to be ready, okay? You have to be ready to deal with people. You don't know where they're coming from. You know, strange people. And you know, Les Brown, one of my favorite motivational speakers, he said, it is better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared for it. How many times you had an opportunity, you're like, man, I wish I'd have been ready for that. But if you're always trying to make sure you're ready, you'll always be able to get it done. Most of the time. Not all the time, but probably about 95%. Okay? Let's move on to the next one. And so Scripture says in Galatians 6 and 7, we reap what we sow. Charles Stanley says, more than we sow and later we sow. More than we sow and later than we sow. You know, this is a very, a description of sowing and reaping, planting, right? You don't see the fruit of what you do right away. Very seldom. That's why somebody came up with the idea of what we call delayed gratification. So to give us the patience to be able to wait while we continue to work, right? And that's where faith comes in, because faith is we work towards the goal. We don't know what the goal is. We don't know if we're going to accomplish it all the time, but we work towards it, and we know what we're trying to do. You know, the appreciation is when sometimes months, sometimes years later, sometimes decades, somebody comes back to you and say, man, you know, that conversation we had, and they tell you all the great things that happened as a result of it, the impact you had on their life. Sometimes one conversation, sometimes 10. Sometimes just a good word, right? So I'm saying is that we have to make it our business. This is what we're going to do. Change how we think and what we're going to, how we go about these things. Next slide, please. So this is my motto, and everybody keeps stealing it. Be a happy warrior, okay? Okay, what I mean by that is we're warriors. The Bible tells us that we're warriors for Christ, okay? I'm a warrior for Christ, and I'm a warrior in some other ways too, okay? I look at things that I'm trying to accomplish in politics with a warrior mentality, okay? And I've adapted that more probably over the last 5 or 6 years than I've ever had, because I see what's happening. I knew when I started doing this, there's a chance that things will not get better. And they're not, okay? The Bible tells us that before Christ returned, things will get worse and worse. The question is, how are you going to handle it? You see, there's a peace inside of us as a result of what we know we possess. And we can hold on to that, keep us flowing like we need to flow in the midst of the storm. When COVID hit 4 years ago and everybody's freaking out, I was frustrated. You know what I was frustrated about? That the church was freaking out. I was like, wait a minute, I understand these other people, but we're supposed to be the example to help them understand how they're supposed to respond, to be able to beat back the lies they're being told. But unfortunately, the vast majority of the church went along with it. So that tells you something. In Matthew chapter 7, he wrote, talking about those who are going to go into the kingdom. He said, broad and wide is the gate that leads to destruction, but narrow is the gate that leads to righteousness, and few there be that find it. Think about what I'm saying, folks. Out of all of mankind that ever existed in the history of mankind, percentage-wise, it's going to be a few, right? Many are called, few are chosen. The Bible constantly tells us that. Don't get it twisted. People constantly telling you, oh, you know, all these people going to heaven. No. The people going to heaven are the ones who committed their lives to the Lord, okay? Without exception, okay? It's not saying you're going to be perfect. It's saying you have made the commitment, and you can tell the difference between those who have and those who haven't, okay? Next slide, please. Okay, this is my website. This is my contact information. You want to reach out to me for any reason. Like I said, we play to win. What I mean is I don't like wasting my time. So I do what I do very deliberately, okay? I don't like fluff. I don't even have fluffy conversations with people anymore. If people start talking fluff, I normally figure out a way to shut them down so I can move on. I'm serious. My tolerance level it no longer exists. We're at a point in time where When you have look, everybody seems to be surprised this is Texas. I'm like, look, we got reprobates everywhere. When you have an elected official who's in office, this woman is not a young woman, who's proposing a bill to give children the ability to be able to tell their parents that you don't have any control over me about what I want to do with my health decisions, my education decisions, but you're going to pay for me? No. No, that's not going to work, okay? Next slide, please. This is my son, Eugene Jr. He is 24, soon to be 25, running for Dallas City Council. When I was, I guess about some time ago, when I was probably early days of us being married, I used to deliver for UPS, and I delivered to a guy's house. He was homeschooled. He had 7 kids who were like stair steps. I was like, wow. I was like, man, we hadn't started homeschooling yet. And I was like, wow, man, he's raising up an army. He gave me an idea, right? So I tell all Christian parents, raise your kids as an army. We need help, okay? Especially as we get older, right? We don't have the same level of energy that we had before, right? And if you're smart enough, you can actually start guiding the army. You can be an inspiration. You can be a guide of wisdom to help them make good decisions, right? Yeah, they need that. So is there a video connected to that? Yeah. So, oh, yes, okay, yeah. So that's his information right there. If you want to go to the website, you can either go to the website or go to QR code. We are raising money for this campaign, trying to give him the resources he needs to help him to win this outright. Look, in this election, we live on the very southern end of Dallas. The boundary of where we live, the other side of the boundary is another city. So we're on the very southern edge of Dallas, and runs from, I think our district runs from Seagoville well into the west side of Dallas, a little bit slightly west of 67 along I-20. The point I'm making is that this is a unique opportunity because it's the guy who's had the seat 16 out of the last 18 years, he's term limited out for the last time. So there's 6 people running for this seat. And we plan to beat them all outright first round. Okay? I believe we can do it. And I believe the Lord's going to give us favor. And so before we close, anybody have any questions? Anything you'd like to ask before I close?
Is that election in May?
Yes, sir. That's right. So early voting starts middle of April. Yes, ma'am.
I don't vote in Dallas anymore, but who's holding that?
His name is Tennell Atkins. Like I said, he's been there. He likes to go by the fact that he's mayor pro tem. I don't know what that means. I don't think it really means anything. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Thank you for your time. It was awesome being with you guys tonight. Thank you, Troy, for the opportunity.